Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Like most of you guys know, I love a David and Goliath story, which is why we're covering the Polish-Soviet War. This video is sponsored by World of Tanks. World of Tanks is a free-to-play game for PC that allows you to fight battles in historically accurate tanks from the Second World War and beyond. If you use my link in the description below, you can claim a free M22 Locust tank. More about World of Tanks at the end of this video. In the aftermath of the First World War, new countries emerged as quickly as old ones fell apart. The Russian, German, and Austro-Hungarian empires collapsed all at once. The Russian Civil War, which had started in 1917, was in full swing by 1919, and the Communist Red Army in Russia had largely routed the anti-Bolshevik White Army. Fearing the revolution would continue spilling into neighboring states, Poland sent forces to the Russo-Polish border. Though no one really knows how exactly the Polish-Soviet War started, most believe it was a gradual escalation, eventually leading to a large-scale Polish offensive after several skirmishes with communist partisans. By the end of 1919, the Poles had pushed as far as Vilnius and Minsk in the north and had taken a large swath of western Ukraine, all with very little resistance, as the Russians were simply not prepared to defend themselves against a Polish incursion in the midst of civil war. The Poles, under leadership of Józef Piłsudski, quickly formed an alliance with what was left of Ukraine and launched yet another offensive in April of 1920. They again encountered very little resistance and even took the Ukrainian capital of Kiev in early May. But then they stopped. Polish forces had no capacity to move further. The Polish and Ukrainian forces had to walk hundreds of miles with almost no vehicles and barely enough horses to carry supplies. The new occupiers of Kiev were exhausted, barely equipped, and hundreds of miles away from reinforcements. The Poles in the northeastern end of the border were not much better off. They too had stretched supply lines, with only 120,000 men and 460 artillery pieces spread along an open and indefensible frontier. They were extremely vulnerable. By now, Moscow had had enough. After months of a slow buildup, the Red Army had about 300,000 men with an ample supply of artillery that were ready for deployment. Red Army commander and eventual ice pick repository Leon Trotsky ordered a two-prong attack. He sent Joseph Stalin to the south to retake Kiev and then move further west into Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, Tukhachevsky was to attack from the north and retake Belarus. Total numbers are hard to come by, but Soviet forces in these two attacks numbered around 300,000 and were split evenly between Stalin and Tukhachevsky. Tukhachevsky's army of 160,000 men pushed west in early July 1920. He brought along more than 700 artillery pieces and almost 3,000 machine guns, far outgunning any Polish defenders. Meanwhile, in the south, most of the fighting was done by the 1st Cavalry Army, comprised exclusively of men crazy enough to still fight on horseback even after World War I. They swung around Kiev and captured the city of Brody, far behind the Polish in the first week of August. They then planned to move quickly to Lviv. Stalin's infantry was slower, but they made great advances as well. But how did the Russians turn the tide so quickly? Well, the initial Russian attack was successful due to a combination of three major factors. First was superior numbers. Second was the fact that the Polish were at the end of their supply lines. And third was the disorganized state of the Polish army, having received most of its equipment from other countries. While the Russians weren't extremely well organized either, they were at least able to supply most of their troops sufficiently, at least for now. While the original Russian plan was to just take back the Ukraine and territory that Poland had occupied, Tukhachevsky pushed on. The energetic and opportunistic general believed that the proletariat would rise up wherever Russian troops arrived. He planned to destroy the Polish army in the north, take Warsaw, and then spread the communist revolution into Germany. The political leaders of Moscow were a little more cautious, fearing retaliation from non-communist European powers. On the other hand, they were also afraid of confronting Tukhachevsky lest he turn on them. Tukhachevsky was relentless and kept up a murderous speed, never allowing the Polish army to rest, regroup, or organize a defense. But poor logistical consideration took a toll on Tukhachevsky's force. Large numbers of casualties were sustained, and many soldiers who couldn't keep up with the advance were simply left behind. The soldiers who did keep up had to defend a long and outstretched perimeter while still pushing west. By the time the attack commenced on Warsaw, Tukhachevsky only had 50,000 men ready for the assault of his original 160,000. What's worse, Stalin, after receiving contradictory orders, refused to send the 1st Cavalry Army to Warsaw, keeping them stationed in Lviv. More troops were siphoned off when Tukhachevsky was ordered to send reinforcements to Crimea, as Stalin was hung up in Lviv, and the entire 4th Army was cut out of the picture, as they were fully committed to the westward push in northern Poland after their communication line was broken with headquarters. This left the area around Warsaw extremely vulnerable, and huge gaps in the line appeared. Meanwhile, Yusuf Palutsky had managed to gather all available troops in Warsaw for a last-ditch defense. Fighting was fierce, and the Polish forces stationed across the Vistula River were gradually pushed back, but Palutsky noticed a major gap in Soviet lines, just south of the city, that allowed him to break through and flank the 16th Army, isolating the 15th Army. It was a resounding success. After 10 days of fighting, Polish forces had inflicted around 60,000 casualties and captured approximately 60,000 more. By contrast, Poland only suffered around 30,000 casualties. By the time of Tukhachevsky's retreat, he had at most 7 divisions left that could fight. But no worries, the 1st Cavalry Army was finally on the move to help Tukhachevsky take Warsaw. Yeah, they were a little out of the loop. By late August, the cavalry was completely surrounded and realized they were invading Poland all by themselves. What followed was yet another Russian defeat at the Battle of Kamarov, Europe's last major cavalry battle. Just a month later, in late September, Palutsky launched a new offensive, relentlessly driving the Russians back, ultimately bringing the Soviets to the negotiating table. The Peace of Riga was signed on March 18th of the following year, granting Poland parts of Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. Poland would hold on to this territory until 1939, when they were defeated by Germany and the Soviet Union. That invasion is more well known for a number of reasons, but we shouldn't let it eclipse the importance of the events we've talked about today. In the early days of communist rule in the USSR, it was genuinely unclear how far the new movement might spread, especially in Europe's chaotic interwar political climate. If the Polish had not stopped the Soviets' Western advances, the course of European history in the 20th century might have been vastly different. I would now like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this video, World of Tanks. World of Tanks is a free-to-play, massively multiplayer online game set in the mid-20th century. Join the Armchair Historian team and millions of other players on the battlefield by choosing between 5 different types of vehicles: light tanks, medium tanks, heavy tanks, tank destroyers, and self-propelled guns, which are all designed to be as realistic as possible without taking away from the fun. Each vehicle can be customized however you want, whether you want to make it more effective through the installation of different guns, turrets, and tracks, or just by applying camouflage, slogans, or national flags. You can receive a free M22 Locust tank if you use my link in the description below. Thanks for watching.